Welcome to Sleepy Historian, where the past drifts softly through candlelight and silence. Tonight, we travel through the forgotten corners of the Middle Ages, a world of strange customs, sacred laughter, and rituals so curious they had to be banned forever. You'll walk through misty streets before dawn, hear the bells that once called the faithful, and meet the fools who turned devotion into comedy, science into sin, and joy into law. There's no need to stay awake. The story will keep moving whether your eyes are open or not. Just let the voices of old Europe hum quietly in the background, where bread can be whispered to, geese can wear crowns, and one misplaced joke can change the course of history. So dim the light, slow your breathing, and let the centuries unfold like pages turning in candle flame. You're not here to study, you're here to drift. This is Sleepy Historian, where history whispers you to sleep. You stand in the dark stillness of a medieval village, just before dawn. The sky above is a thick bruise of blue and coal smoke, and somewhere a rooster is thinking about announcing itself, but decides, wisely, to wait. The air tastes like wood, ash and dew, and you can almost feel the centuries pressing in around you, that mix of mystery, manure, and misplaced faith that defined the Middle Ages. A candle flickers in the window of a baker's hut. The flame trembles as if gossiping with the shadows. You move closer, the cobblestones uneven underfoot, and the faint hum of early morning labor drifts through the air, the soft thud of kneading dough, the creak of a door, the low murmur of prayers said more out of habit than belief. Here, in the 13th century, every task is ritual. Even bread has its ceremony. Bakers in some towns whispered to their loaves before putting them in the oven, quiet words of encouragement or warnings not to rise too proudly. It wasn't superstition exactly, more like medieval customer service. Bread that misbehaved could get you accused of witchcraft or worse, fined by the guild for dishonest loaves. You hear the town bell moan once in the distance. It's not yet sunrise, but already you can sense the order of the day forming the rules, the routines, the small rituals that made people feel safe in a world ruled by luck and punishment. Not every tradition was noble or wise. Some were just strange, others dangerous, and a few were so disastrously misused that kings, bishops, or entire parliaments had to step in and say, "All right, that's enough of that." Tonight's story is about those, the traditions that went too far, the songs, games, and customs that were once loved, until one fool took them to absurd extremes. The medieval world, after all, was built on rituals that hovered between sacred and ridiculous. A single bad performance could turn celebration into crime. You pass a row of houses half-timbered, leaning together like gossiping, old friends. Smoke curls from their chimneys, carrying the comforting scent of yesterday's fire. You can hear a drunk still humming a festival tune in an alley, something about St. Monday, the unofficial day off that labourers invented long before weekends were a thing. It was popular until employers realised no one was showing up to work on Mondays. Naturally, it got banned. Imagine that, the world's first HR policy. Your path leads toward the market square, where a wooden stage is being set up under torchlight. A group of villagers laugh quietly as they prepare for something called the Feast of Fools, a real medieval festival where commoners mocked priests, dressed as bishops, and performed parodies of church rituals. It was, in essence, history's first recorded office party gone wrong. Eventually, it became so wild that Pope Innocent III himself banned it, declaring that laughter must not profane the altar. You can almost hear the regret in his tone. A soft wind passes through, carrying the faint sound of distant chanting. The air hums with that strange medieval balance, holiness and mischief side by side. You imagine the baker whispering to his bread, the blacksmith blessing his hammer, and a jester somewhere sharpening his wit just enough to get away with it. Historians still debate whether people truly believed these rituals worked, or if they were just playing along for comfort. Maybe both. When your world depends on the harvest, on weather, on luck, you tend to talk to bread. You tend to bow to bells. You tend to find patterns in chaos, and when someone ruins it, the banhammer of history swings fast. You pause beside a stone well, its rope damp and rough to the touch. The village feels suspended between night and day, between the memory of old customs and the dawn of reason. Somewhere, a fool is about to do something unforgettable, something that will make a bishop write a law, and a century of peasants shake their Heads. But that's for later. For now, you stand in the pre-dawn quiet, wrapped in the heavy air of superstition and soot. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because anything bad happens, but because sleep might claim you first. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a slow breath. Let the weight of the world fade a little. If you're enjoying this soft step into the past, a gentle tap on the like button helps more than you think. And if you whisper your local time and where you're listening from in the comments, I'll know how far the night travels. Now, let's ease into tonight's story of medieval traditions, once beloved and later banned forever. You wake to the sound of laughter. It isn't modern laughter, not the sharp, meme-shaped kind, but the rolling, unrestrained kind that sounds like someone forgot they were supposed to behave. The square before you has transformed overnight. Torches flare. Musicians tune their lutes with more enthusiasm than skill. And someone in a bishop's hat made of turnips is shouting about holy mischief. It's the Feast of Fools. The baker you met earlier is here too, still dusted with flour, and grinning like a man who knows tomorrow's bread will taste of regret. All around him, priests are pretending to be peasants, peasants pretending to be priests, and everyone pretending that this won't end badly. A donkey, wearing a robe of stolen altar cloth, brays as if to punctuate the absurdity. The crowd cheers. You can almost feel the mood, that dangerous line between comedy and heresy. For one day, the hierarchy of medieval life flips upside down. The low-born mock the clergy, the choir sings parody hymns, and the townspeople revel in the chaos of sanctioned rebellion. It's catharsis disguised as carnival. And for a few blissful hours, even the most solemn priest becomes a fool among fools. A young cleric steps onto the stage, wobbling slightly under a makeshift crown of bread loaves. "Behold," he shouts, "I am the new bishop of nonsense." The crowd roars with approval, mugs of ale raised. Someone throws a cabbage. A moment later, someone else throws something that is definitely not a cabbage. The laughter swells. It's all fun until one fool decides to push the joke too far. According to church records from the 13th century, a monk in Rouen once performed mock mass during the feast, but replaced the holy incense with dung and the sacred bread with sausages. It got a huge laugh, apparently. It also got the entire event outlawed for years. Historians still debate whether that monk was imprisoned or promoted to creative director of chaos, but either way, the church was not amused. You can imagine the bishop watching this all unfold, his patience stretched thinner than a communion wafer. He doesn't hate laughter, not exactly, but he fears it. In the medieval mind, laughter belonged to the body, and the body was suspicious. Too much laughter, and you might forget to fear heaven. Too much fun, and you might forget to pay your tithes. The donkey brays again, as if mocking that very logic. The bishop sighs, crosses himself, and whispers something to a nearby guard. Somewhere in the crowd, a rumor spreads. This will be the last Feast of Fools. Still, the people keep laughing. You can't stop a tradition mid-revel. A juggler tosses 3 apples and 1 onion. A drummer pounds out a rhythm that could raise the dead, if the dead weren't already here in spirit. You feel the collective pulse of a community using humor as therapy, laughing at the system that rules them, knowing it's the only safe rebellion they'll ever have. Then it happens, the fool's folly that seals the fate of the feast. A man, dressed as an angel but clearly less holy than he claims, climbs the church, steps and shouts, "If heaven won't bless us, perhaps we'll bless ourselves." He grabs the bishop's crozier and waves it like a tavern sword. The crowd gasps, then laughs, then gasps again as the real bishop steps forward, face pale and furious. That was the moment the Feast of Fools crossed from festival to felony. The bishop calls for order, the crowd stumbles back into silence, and the turnip-hatted jester drops to his knees. The torches sputter, the music falters, and for a heartbeat, you can hear the quiet panic of people realizing that joy has limits. By nightfall, the edict is written. The Feast of Fools is banned in this diocese. Priests are forbidden to participate. Anyone caught performing mock rites faces excommunication. A tradition born from laughter dies in a puff of candle smoke and paperwork. And yet, the memory lingers. Years later, villagers still whisper about it, the night when donkeys wore vestments, when sausages were sacrament, when laughter briefly became law. Some even revive it in secret, behind locked tavern doors. After all, no one bans joy forever. they just make it go underground. You step back into the dim alley, the smell of wine and tallow still hanging in the air. Somewhere behind you, the stage creaks in the wind, empty now, save for a single wooden mask left behind. It stares at you, smiling faintly, as if it remembers what it once meant to laugh at power. Not every tradition ends cleanly. Some go out in disgrace, others in nostalgia, but all of them leave a faint echo, a reminder that humanity will always find a way to make fun of itself, no matter how many rules it writes. You turn toward the river, the dawn finally breaking over the rooftops. The bells begin to ring again, slower this time, more cautious. Their sound rolls across the town like a sigh. The feast is over, the fools are gone, but history, as always, keeps the joke alive. And just ahead, another tradition is waiting to meet its own undoing. The cobblestones ahead are slick with dew, glistening like scales under the shy morning light. You walk toward the sound of music, faint, frantic, and just a little off-key. It's the kind of tune that feels harmless at first, but if you listen too long, you start to sense a strange fever in it. At the edge of the town square, a small crowd has gathered. Men, women, even children, all of them moving in unison. Their feet slap the stones with dull rhythm. Their faces are pale, their eyes distant. This isn't a celebration. It's something else entirely. You've arrived in the summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, and this is the dancing plague. It begins, as most bad ideas in history do, with one person. Frau Trophäa, her name is recorded, began dancing alone in the street one morning. No music, no festival, just an unstoppable rhythm that gripped her body. She danced for hours, then for days. Within a week, dozens joined her. Within a month, it was hundreds. No one could explain it. Not the priests, not the doctors, not even the local guild of respectable musicians who were hastily hired to play along, hoping it might somehow help. Spoiler, it didn't. The dancers kept going until their legs gave out from exhaustion, dehydration, or something stranger. Historians still debate what truly caused it. Some say mass hysteria, others poisoned bread, and a few, the ones who love drama, whisper about divine punishment. Whatever it was, the authorities eventually banned music altogether, thinking silence would cure the madness. It didn't help much, but it did ruin the local tavern scene. You stand at the edge of the square, watching the dancers stumble in slow circles. One man collapses, only to be pulled upright again by his friends, as if stopping would invite something worse. The air smells like sweat and fear. Somewhere, a mother prays aloud, her voice trembling. Lord, let their feet rest. A town official, red-faced and sleepless, shouts orders to nearby guards. No drums, no fiddles, remove the musicians. The fiddlers shrug and shuffle away, relieved, but also disappointed. It's not every day your audience literally can't stop dancing. You can't help but notice how quickly the absurd becomes the tragic in this century. A joyful act dancing becomes dangerous, even deadly. Authorities do what authorities always do. They write a law. And just like that, public dancing is banned for months. Of course, this isn't the first time dance caused chaos. Medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with rhythm. In some towns, it was considered divine joy, in others, a sin of the flesh. The same twirl that brought you closer to God in one parish could get you excommunicated in another. Medieval consistency was not a strong point. A monk passing nearby mutters, "The devil's tambourine shakes again." You wonder if that's theology or just his way of saying he hates noise. Either way, he's convinced that Frau Trophäa started something unholy. Perhaps he's not entirely wrong. There's something unsettling about movement without rest, about joy that refuses to end when the body says it should. But behind the superstition, there's something deeply human too. The dancers weren't evil or cursed, they were desperate. Life in 1518 Strasbourg was cruel. Famine, disease, endless work, and little joy. Maybe this plague was rebellion disguised as rhythm. Maybe it was the only way people knew how to shout without words. You step closer. A young girl spins by, her hair clinging to her face. She's smiling, but her eyes are wet. The baker from before might call that faith in motion. The bishop, however, would call it grounds for divine panic. Eventually, the town council does what all exhausted bureaucrats do. They pass the blame. Physicians declare the dancers overheated. Priests organize mass processions to beg for forgiveness. And finally, mercifully, the dancers slow. The last of them collapses near the steps of the church, her hands twitching as if the music still plays somewhere deep inside her bones. The decree follows soon after, no street dancing without clerical permission. Yes, they actually needed a law for that, to prevent any further contagion of movement, the document says. Imagine a government meeting where the minutes read, "Agenda stop the people from wiggling." The square falls quiet. The fiddles are locked away, the drums confiscated, and even humming in public is frowned upon for a while. Yet, if you listen closely, you can still hear something beneath the silence. The faint pulse of rebellion, the heartbeat of joy that refuses to vanish. As you walk away, the wind carries a ghost of that melody. You can almost see Frau Troffea's shadow spinning at the corner of your eye, stubborn, graceful, unrepentant. History moves on, of course. The dancers are buried, the band's forgotten. But every festival, every flash mob, every midnight waltz since then carries a trace of that unstoppable rhythm. Because you can silence the music, but not the need to move. And just beyond the city walls, another strange custom waits to meet its own unfortunate end, this time involving animals, ale, and one very confused rooster. You follow the dirt path that snakes out of Strasbourg, winding past fields still damp from dawn. The music of the dancing plague fades behind you, replaced by a quieter countryside rhythm. The creak of wagon wheels, the low murmur of cows, and somewhere in the distance, the indignant crow of a rooster who clearly has no sense of timing. You arrive at a small village surrounded by thatched barns and gossip. Here, the people are gathered for something both ordinary and ridiculous. A public trial. Not of a thief, not of a heretic, but of a chicken. Yes, a rooster, accused of witchcraft. He stands well, perches, in a wooden cage, feathers puffed, eyes full of unearned confidence. Around him, villagers whisper, crossing themselves. A local judge, a man with more wig than wisdom, clears his throat. "This creature," he declares, "hath laid an egg." Gasps ripple through the crowd. A rooster that lays an egg is, of course, impossible, or at least, it's supposed to be. So when it happens, the medieval mind has two immediate options: science or Satan. Guess which one they went with. You lean against a post, watching the absurd spectacle unfold. The judge continues, "Such an unnatural act must be the work of the devil. For who but he would confuse the order of creation?" The rooster blinks slowly, as if weighing his defense options. It sounds funny now, but to these people, it was deadly serious. In medieval Europe, animal trials were a real thing. Pigs, goats, even insects were occasionally dragged before local courts accused of crimes from crop destruction to sorcery. They were given lawyers, yes, actual lawyers, and sometimes even excommunicated. If that sounds bureaucratically excessive, well, welcome to the 1400s. The rooster's so-called egg sits on a table as evidence, pale and trembling under the weight of superstition. A clerk records everything meticulously on parchment, because even nonsense needs paperwork. A priest steps forward, holding a crucifix like a weapon. "The devil," he intones, "may take many forms. Even this fowl may be his vessel." Someone in the crowd whispers that the egg could hatch into a basilisk, a serpent so venomous it could kill with a glance. You can almost hear the collective imagination spiraling. The baker from the previous town would probably say, "Well, that escalated quickly." Historians still debate whether these animal trials reflected belief or performance, whether people truly thought beasts could sin, or if it was more about reaffirming human control in a world that constantly slipped through their fingers. Maybe it was both. A legal ritual that soothed fear with the illusion of order. The verdict, unsurprisingly, is grim. The rooster is found guilty of consorting with darkness. His punishment, execution by fire. The villagers nod solemnly, as though justice has been done. Somewhere in the crowd, a child begins to cry, not for the rooster, but for the sheer tension in the air, that strange blend of righteousness and confusion that so often defines human history. The flames are small but fierce. Feathers curl, Smoke drifts upward, and for a brief, eerie moment, the people cheer. Then silence. Only the crackle of wood and the faint scent of cooked irony remain. By dusk, the case is recorded in the village ledger. The crime, the punishment, the lesson. Future generations would look back and wonder how anyone could take such trials seriously. Yet, you can't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for them. The world back then was unpredictable, brutal, and full of mystery. When something defied explanation, it was easier to blame the devil than to admit you didn't understand. It's a strange comfort, isn't it? To believe that even chaos follows rules, even if those rules are absurd. As night settles, the villagers drift home. The judge lingers, staring into the ashes. Maybe he feels doubt, a flicker of reason trying to surface. Or maybe he's just wondering what's for dinner. Either way, tomorrow he'll preside over something equally irrational. You walk away, the stars blinking awake above the fields. Somewhere behind you, a few surviving chickens cluck nervously, probably holding an emergency meeting. They'll keep their heads down for a while. Can't be too careful when your cousin's been convicted of sorcery. A soft wind brushes through the grass. The smell of smoke fades into the scent of hay. The world seems calm again, too calm. Which, in medieval Europe, means trouble is brewing somewhere else. Because if they could put a rooster on trial, wait until you hear what they did to bread, bells, and laughter itself. And up ahead, in the next town, the festival is preparing to test the patience of heaven once more, with costumes, wine, and a little too much honesty. You reach the next town by mid-morning, though time here feels like a rumour rather than a rule. The air smells faintly of honeyed ale, an anticipation, that particular mix of devotion and mischief that only medieval festivals could manage. The streets are draped in banners, bright as old saints' paintings, and from somewhere deep within the square comes the hollow thump of drums and the metallic rattle of bells. It's Carnival, the grand prelude to Lent, when everyone indulges before repentance comes calling. A season of masks, laughter, and just enough sin to make confession interesting. You watch a group of villagers don absurd costumes. A farmer dressed as a cardinal, a nun in wooden devil horns, and a small boy wrapped entirely in cabbage leaves. Someone yells, "All truths tonight must be spoken," and the crowd cheers. That's the problem with Carnival. It gives people permission to be honest, and honesty, historically, has a terrible survival rate. A jester balances on a barrel in the center of the square. His bells chime with each exaggerated bow. "Tonight," he shouts, "we feast, we jest, we tell the truths no one wants to hear." His grin wavers for half a second, as if he knows what's coming. Carnival was meant to be controlled chaos, a safety valve for a repressed society. But humans, being humans, never stop at just enough. Before long, the jokes turn sharper. A mock wedding lampoons a nobleman's scandal. A trial of the saints mocks the clergy. Someone starts parodying sermons with suspicious accuracy. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but behind it you can sense something tightening, like a smile that's gone on too long. The local priest, watching from the steps of the church, crosses his arms. His expression says, "I will definitely write a complaint about this later." Historians still debate whether these carnivals were truly blasphemous or just too honest for comfort. What's certain is that, by the late Middle Ages, their satire hit too close to home. In 1543, the town of Nördlingen in Germany banned Carnival altogether after a comedian accidentally insulted the Duke's baldness, an act that ended with both the comedian and his stage burned for purification. Yes, medieval HR policies were very direct. Back in your current town, the performance continues. The jester, emboldened by applause, begins imitating the bishop's pompous sermons, complete with exaggerated piety and dramatic sniffing of incense. The crowd howls. Even the baker from earlier is laughing so hard he drops his bread. But in the back of the square, two armored guards exchange nervous glances. You can almost feel the energy shift. Laughter is becoming rebellion. Mockery, in an age obsessed with divine order, is a kind of heresy. And the church, for all its tolerance of celebration, draws the line somewhere between good-natured humour and public satire, featuring the bishop's nose. The jester raises his hands, sweat shining under the torchlight. "Friends," he declares, If heaven has ears, it must be laughing too. The audience roars except the priest. The guards move. By morning, the carnival stage is dismantled. The banners are gone. An edict is nailed to the church door. Henceforth, the feast of folly and mockery shall be forbidden, lest laughter corrupt the soul and mock the holy. The jester's name is omitted, as if silence could erase what happened. But people remember. For years afterward, carnival returns in hushed whispers, smaller, subtler, masked behind harvest feasts and innocent gatherings. The jokes are softer now, coded and safer, but in every smirk and wink, the memory of that night lingers, the night when truth wore bells and got punished for it. You pass through the empty square. Confetti clings to the cobblestones, like tiny ghosts of laughter. A single mask lies abandoned near the fountain, half smiling, half burned. The wind carries away the last echoes of music, leaving only the sound of your own footsteps. Medieval life, you realize, was built on a careful balance between order and chaos. Too much of either, and something broke. Maybe that's why every century keeps inventing new versions of the same rituals, not because people forget, but because we secretly need the chance to go a little too far. As the road narrows again, the scent of smoke and iron fills the air. Up ahead, a forge glows faintly in the dusk. You hear hammer strikes, rhythmic as heartbeats. The blacksmith is singing something about bells, which, as history will soon reveal, is not a great idea. Because next, you'll meet the town that tried to silence time itself and accidentally banned joy. The path leads you downhill, where smoke curls like silk from the chimneys of a quiet village. It's evening now, the hour when the sky deepens into a velvet blue, and the first stars peek through like shy witnesses. You can smell iron and rain, and the faint tang of something anxious. Ahead, you see a church tower, tall, elegant, and utterly still. No sound, no echo, no bells. At first, it feels peaceful, but the silence is wrong. You can sense it in the way people move softly, deliberately, as though any sudden noise might wake something best left asleep. A blacksmith hammers metal in his forge, but with every strike, he flinches. The rhythm is uneven. He stops to listen, as if expecting a reprimand from the sky. You approach him. He wipes his brow, nods toward the church and mutters, "They took the bells down last winter. Said they'd brought trouble." He doesn't elaborate, so you walk toward the church yourself. The wooden doors creak open, with a sound that feels too loud for this place. Inside, the air smells of wax and dust. The bell ropes dangle uselessly, tied off near the rafters like abandoned vines. A few villagers kneel in prayer, their whispers quick and fearful. A young woman turns as you enter. Her eyes are tired, her hands clasped tight. "They said the bells called it," she murmurs. "Called what?" you ask. Her answer is simple and deeply medieval. The storm. According to a parchment nailed near the altar, this village once prided itself on its bells, massive bronze ones, tuned by local artisans to ring across the valley. They were symbols of community and protection, rung for births, weddings, deaths, and festivals, until one unlucky year, when lightning struck the tower during a ringing. The bell melted slightly. The ringer was thrown to the floor but survived. And because this is the Middle Ages, survival was immediately suspicious. People decided he must have done something wrong, or worse, something unholy. Soon the stories spread. Some said the bells were cursed. Others swore the devil had hidden inside them, whispering thunder into their bronze. And because fear loves a committee, the town council voted to silence them until divine clarity returns. That was 20 years ago. Divine clarity, as it turns out, is not punctual. Now the town lives in uneasy quiet. Time passes without its familiar rhythm. No bells for dawn, none for prayer, none for death. Funerals are signalled by black cloths hung from windows. Weddings are whispered affairs. The only sound is wind and the distant creak of wood. Historians still debate whether this belfry silence was rooted in superstition or politics. Some records hint that the ban was less about curses and more about noise complaints from a nearby monastery. The monks, apparently, found the bells distractingly merry. Bureaucracy, it seems, can outlast any demon. But whatever the reason, Something subtle broke when the bells stopped. You can feel it. In a world without clocks, bells were time. They stitched the day together, gave rhythm to existence. Without them, the hours blur. People rise when the sky feels right, eat when they remember, and sleep when darkness insists. You step outside again. The blacksmith has finished his work. He looks up at the tower and mutters, half to himself, "Even God must miss the sound." You can almost imagine the bells still hanging there, heavy, beautiful, silent witnesses, the metal waiting for a reason to sing again. Once a year, though, a few villagers gather in secret to ring small handbells by the river. They say it's not rebellion, just remembrance. They don't ring them loudly, only enough to hear the faint chime drift through the fog like a ghost of time. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it too, the soft toll of a forbidden sound, a single, trembling note cutting through the centuries, reminding you that silence was never meant to win. Then it fades, as everything does. You turn to leave the quiet town behind. The air feels lighter now, as if the past just exhaled. But far on the horizon, across a meadow soaked in twilight, something glimmers, a gathering of lights, laughter, and the smell of roasted grain. It's another village, another story, and this one, oddly enough, begins with beer and ends with a band so tragic it might make even the tavern ghosts weep. You smell it before you see it, that warm, yeasty perfume of roasted barley, damp oak, and optimism. The kind of scent that makes even a bad day seem survivable. You follow it down the slope, into a lively little village, lanterns swinging, voices rising, laughter spilling from a tavern that looks slightly too alive for a Tuesday. Welcome to the 14th century and to the annual ale-tasting festival, the medieval world's closest thing to organized chaos. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and celebration. Barrels line the walls like silent conspirators. Men in wool tunics and women in linen aprons lift mugs the size of flower pots. Even the town priest is here, pretending he's inspecting the moral quality of the brew. Sure, Father. You weave through the crowd, catching snippets of gossip. Someone boasts about their hops, another about the purity of their river water, which is a brave claim in medieval Europe. At the back of the room, a man with an extraordinary moustache stands atop a barrel. "My friends," he slurs with priestly conviction, "tonight we drink to innovation." Innovation, a dangerous word in this era. He raises his mug. "I have created double-fermented ale," he declares. "Stronger, smoother, divine." The crowd cheers, then drinks, then cheers again. Hours later, the line between divine and disastrous blurs. People begin to sing first songs, then laws, then things that sound suspiciously like insults. The priest passes out under a table. Someone tries to milk a goat that isn't there. A local magistrate attempts to fine himself for being too handsome. And then, as so often happens in history, one fool ruins it for everyone. A man named Gerard the Tanner, already infamous for setting his own shoes on fire, last festival decides that ordinary merriment isn't enough. He announces a contest. Whoever drinks the most of the new ale will be crowned Lord of the Barrels. Predictably, Gerard wins. Also predictably, Gerard loses consciousness shortly after. But before collapsing, he manages to declare a royal edict in his slurred best Latin. Henceforth, no man shall work under the tyranny of sobriety. It's unclear whether anyone understood him, but the phrase spreads like spilled beer. For weeks, workers across the town begin taking ale breaks at dawn, noon, and whenever a good excuse arises. Productivity plummets. Horses refuse to move. Someone tries to baptize a pig in stout. By the end of the month, the town council convenes. Their verdict: enough is enough. Let it be known that excessive brewing and unlicensed celebration have offended decency. Ale festivals are hereby forbidden. Just like that, centuries of tradition go flat. The barrels are sealed, taverns closed early, and brewers warned to ferment modestly, which, to anyone who's met a brewer, is an impossible request. You step outside into the night. The tavern lights dim one by one. A group of townsfolk stand in the street, mourning the loss of joy with all the gravity of a funeral. Someone mutters, "They can ban the mugs, but not the thirst." They're right. Historians still debate what truly motivated the ban. Some say it was morality, too much public drunkenness. Others suggest economics, a way for rulers to control grain prices during famine. And some, charmingly, think the clergy just couldn't handle hangovers anymore. Whatever the truth, the ban only made things worse. The following year saw an explosion of underground brewing shadow alehouses. They called them hidden behind barns and under mills. People brewed in secret, using odd ingredients like beetroot and honey, producing drinks that were either miraculous or mildly toxic. You can almost picture it. Midnight gatherings in candlelit barns, mugs raised in defiance, laughter muffled under whispers. The same human instinct that once whispered to bread now whispers to beer. Rise again. Eventually, the ban faded, as bans tend to do. The church quietly reinstated moderate celebrations under new names. Harvest feasts, communal suppers, anything that sounded pious enough to pass inspection. But the memory of Gerard the Tanner's drunken decree lived on. In some regions, old tavern signs still bear his face wide-eyed, smiling, mug raised high with a carved inscription beneath. No man shall work under the tyranny of sobriety. You stand beneath one now, the moonlight glinting off the faded wood. The tavern is silent, its door barred, its barrels empty. Yet, somewhere behind it, you swear you can hear faint laughter, the ghost of a toast that refuses to die. You smile, because you know how this goes by now. Every joyful custom in history eventually finds someone too enthusiastic for its own good. And just as inevitably, every ban becomes a challenge. Far off, down another road, a soft glow flickers, torches, music, and a strange shimmer of feathers. The air smells faintly of smoke and... roasted goose? Ah, yes, the next chapter of this curious journey. Because, if banning ale was complicated, wait until you meet the medieval festival that celebrated animals as priests and got shut down for reasons involving a goose in a bishop's hat. The road carries you through the chill hush of midnight, where even the crickets seem cautious. Then, faintly, you hear laughter again, soft, nervous laughter that sounds like people enjoying something they know they shouldn't. You follow the sound to a chapel glowing with torchlight. Inside, a crowd is gathered around an altar. But this is no ordinary service. A goose, yes, an actual goose stands in the center, draped in a small purple stole. Someone has placed a bishop's mitre on its head. It honks authoritatively, and the crowd erupts in cheers. Welcome to the Feast of St. Goose, also known by the few scholars brave enough to record it as the Feast of the Ass reimagined, a bizarre rural tradition blending parody, piety, and poultry. In many medieval villages, animals were woven into holy life. Donkeys were blessed for their patience, oxen for their labor, cats for catching mice in monasteries. But here, in this corner of Burgundy, they went a step further. Once a year, locals would choose a particularly well-fed goose, dress it in clerical garb, and parade it through the village as their bishop. It was meant to be funny, of course a playful inversion of authority, not unlike the old Feast of Fools. The villagers sang hymns with new, questionable lyrics, "Honky be the Lord who blesses this bird." The priest, for reasons that remain unclear, went along with it. He would even consult the goose during mock sermons, pretending to interpret its honks as divine wisdom. Historians still debate whether this was satire or sincere affection, or perhaps the result of drinking whatever ale survived the last section's ban. Tonight's goose is magnificent. Its feathers shimmer in the candlelight. It struts between pews as though inspecting its flock. Children giggle. Old women throw grain as an offering. A local baker offers a loaf for the good bishop's blessing. The goose pecks it, satisfied. Everything is going well until, inevitably, someone pushes it too far. A man at the back of the church, already deep in his cups, decides to translate the goose's sermon aloud. His Grace says, he declares, slurring, that from now on, all confessions must be paid in breadcrumbs. The crowd howls. Even the priest laughs briefly. But laughter, in this era, is like fire, comforting until someone notices the smoke. The next morning, word reaches the nearby monastery. The abbot arrives, flanked by grim-faced monks. They find feathers on the altar, spilled grain in the nave, and a congregation that looks suddenly very sober. The abbot's voice trembles as he reads the official judgment. Let it be known that no beast shall wear the garments of holy office, nor preside where the name of God is spoken. The feast of St. Goose is hereby abolished under penalty of excommunication. The villagers protest. "It's tradition," they cry. The goose means no harm, but the law is the law, and the abbot is unmoved. That night, the goose, now disgraced, is quietly released into the fields. It waddles away under a full moon, honking into the darkness. One child whispers, "Good night, Your Grace," before being hurried inside. You linger by the chapel door. The laughter is gone. The candles have burned out. The air smells faintly of ashes, and regret the two inevitable byproducts of any medieval good time. Historians, centuries later, will try to make sense of it. Some will argue that these animal festivals were harmless village theatre. Others will insist they were veiled protests against the church's growing rigidity. And a few, with a wink, will write that maybe, just maybe, the goose did deliver better sermons than most bishops. You smile at that last theory. The following spring, the villagers try to revive the festival under a different name, the Blessing of Feathers. But it's not the same. Without the goose, it feels hollow. They sing, they laugh politely, but no one dares bring out a hat. As you leave the quiet village, the moonlight pools in the road ahead like liquid silver. You hear one last echo, faint and far, a lonely honk across the fields. Maybe it's the same goose, maybe just memory. Either way, it sounds dignified. You walk on, thinking about how fragile laughter was back then, how it always seemed to hover between joy and sin, like a candle trembling in a draught. Up ahead, another flicker catches your eye. Not firelight this time, but something metallic. The glow of polished armor, the sound of chanting. A procession is forming in the next valley, torches reflecting off shields. It looks holy, but the mood feels wrong, too loud, too proud. Because next, you'll witness one of the strangest bands of all. A religious ritual that started as devotion and ended as a riot. You follow the chanting down the valley, boots brushing against the damp grass. The sound grows louder, rowdier. It's not the serene hum of monks or the trembling hymns of nuns, it's something else. Joyful, maybe. Drunken, definitely. You crest the hill and see them. A sea of torches winding along the dirt road. Hundreds of pilgrims, if that's still the right word, trudging toward a small shrine glowing in the moonlight. They carry banners, crosses, and an alarming number of wineskins. Their chants sway unevenly between prayer and tavern song. This is the annual procession of St. Godelieve, patron of patience and bad marriages. According to local legend, she was a noblewoman drowned by her husband for being too kind, a medieval crime if ever there was one. Her devotees walk miles each year to honor her memory. At least, that was the idea. Tonight, however, the mood feels less like piety and more like a music festival sponsored by divine irony. A group of young men stagger forward, singing a hymn that rhymes virtue with brew. A woman waves a loaf of bread as an offering. Someone dressed as St. Godelieve herself is sitting in a cart, clearly tipsy, blessing people with a ladle. You walk alongside them, caught in the strange energy, a mixture of faith, fatigue, and fermented courage. A friar trudges past, muttering, "Pilgrimage or plague, I can't tell anymore." Up ahead, the path narrows into a bridge over a shallow stream. The crowd squeezes tighter, torches flare. A man in armor yells for order, which is the one thing no medieval crowd ever delivers. A bottle breaks. A donkey panics. Someone starts shouting about miracles. And in that small, chaotic crucible, faith collides with festival. One woman, trying to calm her friends, slips into the river. She's fine. But the crowd surges to rescue her, knocking over half the torchbearers. Flames leap. People scream. The holy banner catches fire. Within minutes, pilgrimage turns into a full-scale riot. A slapstick apocalypse of soaked pilgrims, fallen icons, and shouting priests. When dawn finally breaks, the shrine of St. Godelieve looks like it survived both devotion and a tavern brawl. The abbot arrives, surveys the wreckage, and utters the most medieval of phrases. "We shall never do this again." And indeed, they didn't. By decree of the local bishop, the procession of St. Godelieve was banned for the foreseeable eternity. Officially, it was because of public indecency during sacred travel. Unofficially, It was because no one could agree who started the fire, or who ended up with the ladle. You stand beside the ruined shrine, watching villagers sweep up soggy banners and melted candle wax. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and embarrassment. A priest sighs. They meant well. They always do. Historians still debate whether these pilgrimages were acts of true faith or just excuses to travel, flirt, and drink somewhere new. Some records describe processions so unruly that towns locked their gates when they saw them coming. One chronicler from Flanders called them pious earthquakes. But beneath the chaos, something real was happening. People weren't mocking faith, they were personalizing it, turning distant holiness into something they could touch, laugh with, and occasionally spill wine on. It was clumsy, human worship, and that's what made it dangerous. You can't help but smile at the thought. Humanity always swings between extremes. Too serious, then too silly. Too rigid, then too wild. The trick and the tragedy is that history keeps banning whichever one happens to be more fun. By midday, the pilgrims have dispersed. The road is quiet again. The only survivors of the festival, a few forgotten sandals and a dented wine jug. You pick it up. The metal still smells faintly of clove and chaos. A blackbird calls from a nearby tree, as if signaling the end of the show. You start walking again, deeper into the countryside, where the hills roll like tired shoulders under the sun. For a while, it's peaceful. Just the crunch of gravel under your feet and the steady rhythm of the wind through the grass. You almost forget that every calm moment in this story has a twist waiting around the bend. And sure enough, there it is, distant shouts, rhythmic drumming, and the unmistakable crack of wooden clubs. Because next, you're about to witness a tradition so infamous, it united peasants and nobles in disgust, a sport that went too far, one brutal winter afternoon, and was never played again. You hear it before you see it, the sound of impact, laughter, and someone yelling the medieval equivalent of, "He's fine," followed by a noise that suggests he is very much not fine. As you round the bend, you find a field alive with chaos. Dozens of men are charging across the mud, swinging wooden clubs the size of shovels. A ball, or what once resembled one, flies through the air like a projectile blessed by poor engineering. Spectators cheer from the sidelines, some clutching mugs, others holding their ribs in sympathy. Welcome to medieval football, the sport that made modern rugby look like a polite tea party. In this version, there are no teams, no rules, and no clear objective beyond get the ball to the church at the other end of town, or die trying. Entire villages would face off men, apprentices, sometimes even monks. If your opponent happened to be a neighboring village that once stole your sheep, well, let's just say things got personal. A baker charges past you, face streaked with mud, shouting, "For St. Crispin," before vanishing into a pile of bodies. Someone else yells, "For the glory of our well," which is either a local motto or evidence of mild concussion. You take shelter behind a hay cart. The game surges around you like a storm. A blacksmith with arms like tree trunks sends 3 players flying with one shove. The ball vanishes, reappears, then gets punted into a window. A cheer erupts, though it's unclear who scored or whether that even matters. Medieval chroniclers called this sport campball, and they wrote about it with the same mix of awe and horror one reserves for natural disasters. In 1314, King Edward II finally issued a decree. We forbid such games which may cause great noise in the city, from which many evils might arise. Which is a very royal way of saying, please stop maiming each other for fun. Of course, no one listened. The bans were ignored, rewritten, ignored again, and occasionally rebranded as community bonding. One bishop complained that half his congregation turned up to Sunday Mass, limping from the devil's pastime. A muddy player stumbles near you, grinning through a cracked tooth. "You watching?" he pants. "It's tradition." Then he sprints back into battle. Moments later, you hear him shout, "Ow, tradition hurts." The field becomes a whirlwind, fists, laughter, flying clumps of earth. You can't help but marvel at the absurdity. A game that started as celebration of unity becoming an accidental reenactment of war. Somewhere near the edge, a group of women are selling ale and betting on who'll break the next cart axle. It's good business, one says. Worst day for bones, Best day for coin. The game continues into dusk, until it's unclear who scores by sheer accident. The crowd roars, mud flies. The victors carry what's left of the ball on their shoulders like a holy relic. Then someone mentions that a pig might have swallowed it, and the party relocates to the nearest tavern for verification. By the next morning, 3 fences are destroyed, 2 roofs dented, and at least 1 goose deeply traumatized. The local magistrate stands in the wreckage, holding a broken club. Never again, he mutters a phrase medieval history used, often and rarely meant. Soon after, the sport is banned again. This time, by both the crown and the clergy. The official reason: disturbance of the peace and hazard to property. The unofficial reason: people keep dying before paying taxes. Historians still debate whether the bans were effective. Spoiler: they weren't. The game simply went underground, played in secret fields at night, with smaller balls, fewer witnesses, and just enough plausible deniability to confuse local sheriffs. You walk across the quiet aftermath, the moon rising over the flattened grass. The air smells of sweat and rain and roasted optimism. A lone shoe sits abandoned in the mud, as though even footwear couldn't handle the violence. You pick it up, shake off the dirt, and can't help but chuckle. For all its madness, this sport was more than just chaos, it was release. Life in the Middle Ages was rigid, hierarchical, suffocating. Out here, at least for a day, everyone was equal in the mud. Still, equality shouldn't require that many broken ribs. As you leave the field, you hear faint music drifting from the next valley. A softer sound, like a lullaby played on strings. It's coming from a monastery. Candles glow in neat rows, their light steady and sane. At least, it seems sane. Until you notice that the monks are wearing masks, and someone is whispering about a banned hymn, one that was supposedly too beautiful for the church to allow. Because next, you'll step into the stone halls of silence, and hear the song that history tried to erase. Night folds itself around you as you approach the monastery. Its stone walls rise from the hillside like the bones of the earth, solemn, ancient, and faintly glowing with candlelight. You can hear the faint echo of chanting carried through the cool wind, but there's something unusual about it. It's not the rigid plain chant you expect from monks. It's softer, haunting, almost human in a way holiness usually avoids. You step closer to the open window. The sound drifts out, layered voices weaving together in impossible harmony. The melody trembles like light on water. Even the stars seem to hush, leaning in to listen. And then you realize this must be it. The song once known as the Hymn of the Hollow Dawn, a composition so beloved, so emotionally overwhelming, that the church eventually banned it. The official reason? It inspired worldly emotions, unbecoming of divine worship, which, translated from medieval clerical language, means it made people feel too much. Inside the chapel, rows of monks stand hooded, swaying gently. The lead singer's voice is thin but piercing, like moonlight turned into sound. The harmony builds not loud, but vast, filling the cold air with warmth. You feel it ripple through you, the kind of beauty that makes the chest ache. And that was precisely the problem. Historians still debate the true origin of the ban. Some claim the hymn's composer, Brother Anselm of Rouen, wrote it after a dream in which angels sang not of God's power but his loneliness. Others say the melody itself resembled a popular love song of the time, and church officials feared listeners couldn't tell the difference between worship and longing. In the Middle Ages, beauty was acceptable, but only when properly supervised. The hymn continues, swelling to its final refrain, a rising note so delicate it feels like the air itself might break. Then, silence. A single candle gutters, the monks lower their heads. One whispers, "We should not have sung it." Another answers, "We could not help it." You step inside quietly. The floor is cold underfoot. The scent of beeswax and stone fills your lungs. The prior, an old man with a trembling hand, approaches you. "You heard it," he says softly. "It isn't a question. We keep it alive in whispers only. They burned the sheets long ago." You ask why. He gives a sad little smile. Because it made men weep when they were meant to kneel. You think of all the other things banned in this strange world: laughter, dancing, bread that talked back, Now, even beauty is suspect. The pattern is almost comforting in its predictability. Every time humanity touches wonder, someone files a complaint. The prior gestures toward a small niche where scraps of parchment are hidden beneath a cracked statue. "That's what's left," he murmurs. You glimpse faint ink curves of melody, fragments of Latin, lux cadit, cor surgit. The light falls, the heart rises. It's almost unbearably simple. A novice monk enters, carrying a candle. His expression is cautious, his voice barely a whisper. "Father, should we destroy it?" The old man shakes his head. "No, let it sleep." He covers the parchments with a linen cloth, as if tucking a child into bed. The gesture feels tender, defiant. Somewhere outside, a nightbird sings, carrying the melody onward. Into the darkness, the way forbidden things often travel. Quietly, invisibly, through those who remember. You step back into the courtyard. The air is heavy with dew. You can still feel the hymn reverberating in your chest, like an echo of something too human to die. Historians, centuries later, will claim no copy of the song survived, but others, the dreamers, the romantics, the insomniacs, will insist that if you listen at dawn in old stone places, you can still hear a faint harmony hiding in the wind. You smile at that thought. You can almost hear it now, distant, wordless, kind. As you leave the monastery, the path leads upward again, through the whispering pines, and on the ridge ahead, faint against the horizon, you see the silhouettes of bonfires and masked figures moving in circles. A village festival, perhaps one that looks older than anything you've yet seen. The smell of burning herbs drifts through the air. The sound of flutes rises, wild and uneven. But the rhythm feels strange, not celebration, not prayer. Something older. Something that once frightened both church and crown enough to outlaw it completely. Because next, you'll walk into the fading embers of a ritual that once ruled the seasons until one night. One fool took the fire too literally, and the ancient dance of midsummer was banned forever. You climb toward the glow, the pine trees thinning, until the hill opens into a clearing filled with flickering light. The bonfire towers above you, a column of flame, writhing like it's trying to reach the stars. Sparks float upward and vanish into the night, like tiny souls escaping paperwork. The villagers are gathered around it, hands linked, faces lit in molten orange. They move in a slow circle, half ritual, half celebration. The ancient midsummer fire dance, a custom so old that even the monks couldn't agree whether it honored saints or something far older. You step closer. The air smells of smoke, pine, sap, and a hint of fear. The kind that hides behind excitement. Children dart between adults with torches, their laughter echoing against the hills. Someone throws an armful of herbs into the flames, and the air blooms with scent. Rosemary, sage, and wild thyme. A woman with ash-streaked cheeks looks up at you. "For luck," she says simply, nodding toward the fire. "For love, for not being cursed by next winter." It's beautiful and dangerous. The fire dance, practiced across Europe for centuries, marked the turning of the seasons. People leapt over the flames for fertility, burned herbs to drive away disease, and rolled burning wheels down hills to chase the sun. The church tolerated it barely. It was easier to rename it as Street, John's Eve, than to stop it altogether. But every year, the line between devotion and chaos blurred a little more. Tonight, it will vanish entirely. The music quickens. Drums throb. Flutes trill. Feet pound the soil. The villagers begin to sing, not in Latin, not in any formal language, but something older, full of round vowels and laughter. You can feel the rhythm in your chest, as if the fire itself is keeping time with your heartbeat. Then someone every story disagrees who decides to impress the crowd. A young man, shirtless, drunk on ale and attention, grabs a burning branch from the bonfire. "The sun burns for us," he shouts, waving it like a sword. The crowd cheers. He starts running around the circle, sparks trailing behind him like comet tails. For a moment, it's glorious, pure spectacle, humanity playing at being cosmic. Then the wind shifts, the branch snaps, fire lands on the thatched roof of a nearby barn. The music stops. Someone screams. Panic ripples outward. Villagers rush for buckets, for cloth, for anything. The fire leaps from roof to hay, from hay to house. You can taste the heat, acrid and relentless. A woman wails as her loom catches. The air fills with smoke and prayer. By dawn, the village still stands, but barely. Half the homes are charred, and the fields smell of ash. The young man, the fool with the torch, kneels in the mud, trembling, muttering apologies no one hears. The priest, soot-streaked and shaking, raises his hands and declares what everyone already knows. No more fires, no more dances, no more nights that challenge the dark. And so, the midsummer fire was banned, not just here, but across kingdoms. Edicts followed. No flame shall be lit in the open on street, John's Eve. No wheel of fire shall roll, no jumping through embers, for it invites demons. Historians will later call it superstition control, but beneath the legal language lies something simpler fear. The kind that follows when joy burns too brightly. You walk through the quiet ruins. The ash crunches beneath your feet. A single torch lies extinguished in the mud. You pick it up, it's still warm, faintly glowing inside, like an ember refusing to die. Nearby, the old woman from before sits beside the cold fire pit, her face unreadable. Every year, she says softly, we tried to hold the sun for just one night. Every year, it burned us a little. She looks up, eyes reflecting the grey light of dawn. They say we'll never do it again. But wait long enough, and someone always will. You glance toward the horizon. The first rays of morning touch the smoke drifting over the valley, turning it gold. The villagers are already rebuilding, stacking what can be saved, murmuring blessings, half Christian, half forgotten. Because life goes on, and fire always returns. As you leave the clearing, the wind carries a faint scent of smoke, mixed with wildflowers. The forest beyond hums quietly, as if absorbing the memory. And somewhere deep inside, you can almost hear the echo of that forbidden rhythm, the pulse of humans trying to make peace with the sun. Down the path, the forest thickens again. You hear bells, small ones, tinkling softly. Not church bells, but attached to animals. You smell damp wool and hear laughter. It's another festival, this one pastoral, peaceful. Shepherds celebrating spring, or so it seems. But as you draw closer, you see something odd. The sheep are wearing wreaths, the men are wearing masks, and someone is solemnly declaring a goat king for a day. A strange custom, yes, and one that, predictably, didn't end well. Because next, you'll meet the animal monarchs of medieval Europe. The crowned goats, pigs, and oxen who reigned for a night, until one such coronation went catastrophically wrong, and the entire practice was banned forever. You come down into a valley painted green with early spring. The grass smells sharp, the air new and wet, and somewhere close by comes the bleating of sheep and the clatter of bells. When you round a bend in the road, you see them dozens of villagers gathered around a wooden pen, crowns of ivy on their heads, singing something between a hymn and a drinking song. In the center of it all stands a goat. He is magnificent, in the way only a slightly bewildered animal can be. Curved horns, amber eyes, a wreath of flowers around his neck. And this is important, a gold-painted crown that keeps sliding down one ear. Someone shouts, "All hail the Goat King," and the crowd cheers. This is the festival of the horned crown, one of those rural traditions historians love to footnote but never fully explain. Every spring, farmers in scattered parts of Europe crowned an animal, usually a goat or an ox, as the spirit of fertility and harvest. The creature was paraded through town, given symbolic gifts, hay, bread, sometimes beer, and then consulted on matters of planting. You watch a small boy solemnly bow before the goat. "Your Majesty," he says, "should we sow barley or rye?" The goat responds with a faint snort, which the crowd takes as a divine endorsement of barley. Democracy, medieval style. It's harmless fun until a man steps forward in a cloak of burlap, clutching a jug. "Our king must have his toast," he cries, and pours ale into a wooden bowl. The goat, obliging, dips its snout in. A cheer goes up. Someone begins to chant, "Long live the king." Someone else adds, "Longer than the last one." Ah, yes, the last one, according to local gossip, and one poorly written parish reckoned. The previous year's festival had ended badly when the king goat was brought into the tavern for a victory lap, and promptly knocked over the ale table. In the resulting chaos, 3 chairs, a psalter, and 1 marriage proposal were lost. Since then, the clergy have been very clear about keeping animals out of sacred or semi-sacred buildings. But tonight, rules are just suggestions. The villagers hoist their bleating monarch onto a makeshift throne, a barrel covered in linen. A man with a shepherd's crook kneels dramatically, declaring, "Your Majesty, we are your humble flock." The crowd roars with laughter. A woman offers the goat a garland of turnips. The animal accepts, mostly by eating it. Then, inevitably, one fool decides to improve the ceremony. A tall blacksmith steps forward, holding a torch. "A king must have a coronation flame," he announces, "to bless the harvest." Before anyone can stop him, he raises the torch high, too close to the goat's crown, still painted gold, still very flammable. There's a small whoosh, a brief moment of stunned silence. Then the goat king, now lightly smoking, lets out an offended bleat and bolts. Chaos follows. The crowd scatters, chasing the flaming monarch through the meadow. A priest faints, children scream. A man yells, "Catch his majesty." Someone else yells, "He's heading for the haystack." You can probably guess what happens next. By the time the fire is put out, the haystack is gone. The goat is fine, but profoundly unimpressed, and the local lord has arrived demanding explanations. His verdict is swift and bureaucratically brutal. Henceforth no beast shall be crowned, nor paraded as royalty, nor given titles above its station. And just like that, the age of animal kings ends. Historians still debate what this ritual really meant. Some argue it was a Christianized remnant of pagan nature worship. Others see it as satire, a safe way to mock authority by giving power to something ridiculous. But one chronicler from 1489 wrote, "They crowned the goat because no man deserved it," which, honestly, feels timeless. The villagers mourn their lost tradition quietly. For years afterward, they still bake small goat-shaped loaves during spring planting. "So the king may eat with us," they say. No one mentions the fire. No one risks a new coronation. The fields grow, the seasons turn, and the memory fades into folklore. You stay behind as the crowd drifts away, the meadow cooling under the twilight. The goat, unbothered, chews on grass beside you. His crown lies dented and blackened in the dirt. You can't help but bow slightly. "Your Majesty," you whisper. He stares, unimpressed, then wanders off toward the hills, leaving you alone with the fading light. Far ahead, beyond the valley, you see another glow, steady, golden, and distinctly human. A town, perhaps. You hear the low toll of bells and the hum of merchants closing their stalls. It seems peaceful at first, but as you approach, you notice something strange in the air. A tension that smells of parchment and ink, of rules freshly written and already broken, because in that town, people once celebrated the most peculiar of customs, the trial of shadows, a legal ritual that began as theatre and ended as blasphemy. And like everything else in this long, restless history, it too would be banned forever after one fool decided to take the script a little too seriously. The path narrows as you enter the town. Evening has drawn its shutters, and the lamplighters move quietly down the main street, tipping oil into glass and muttering the same half-prayer with each new flame. The air feels dense, expectant. There's a crowd gathering in the square, not rowdy this time, but tense, whispering. A wooden platform stands at the center, lit by candles in iron cages. Behind it, a draped table, a few officials, and a tall man in a robe of black wool. He looks like both priest and magistrate, one of those hybrid roles medieval bureaucracy loved so much. A herald steps forward and shouts, "The trial of the shadow shall begin." The crowd murmurs. Someone beside you mutters, "They shouldn't do this again." You ask why. The woman answers flatly, "Because last year the shadow didn't lose." It takes you a moment to understand what that means. The trial of shadows began, centuries ago, as a harmless bit of theatre, a morality play performed during Lent. Townsfolk acted out the eternal struggle between light and darkness, good and evil. They'd project their shadows on the church wall by torchlight, with one actor reciting scripture, while another his silhouette mimicked or mocked him. It was meant to remind people that sin hides in every soul. It was clever, popular, even. Until, predictably, one fool took it too far. You watch as a young actor steps onto the stage, draped in a white robe. He bows to the crowd. A single torch is lit behind him, throwing his long shadow across the stone wall. The magistrate raises a hand. Let the trial commence. The actor speaks. I am the man of light. I stand for truth. The shadow answers not in words, of course, but in perfect movement, copying every gesture, every nod. Then, deliberately, it does something different. When the man bows, the shadow refuses. The crowd murmurs. It's subtle rebellion, the kind that sends a thrill down the spine. The actor continues, voice trembling. Shadow, you are the deceit that stains the heart. Confess your wickedness. The shadow raises its hand, and the actor, unnerved, hesitates. The crowd laughs nervously. You can feel the mood shift. The performance is becoming too real. A second actor, playing the priest, steps in with a censer. Begone, darkness, he cries, swinging the incense. The smoke curls and dances. For a moment, the shadow seems to shimmer, to move independently, just slightly out of sync. A gasp ripples through the audience. Witchcraft, someone hisses. And that was how, in this very town, theatre turned into accusation. The year before, an actor named Rafe Morel had performed this same role, the man of light and his shadow, cast by some quirk of torch or wind, appeared to grin when he wept. People swore they saw it whisper. The next day, Rafe was dragged before the church court, charged with conspiring with darkness. When questioned, he said only, I was merely acting. They did not find that funny. Rafe's trial of shadows ended with him excommunicated and the entire performance banned. But human beings are predictable. Tell them they can't perform a play, and they'll perform it anyway, only quieter and with worse lighting. Tonight's show is an act of defiance. You can see it in the actor's eyes, the thrill of danger disguised as piety. The man on stage trembles but continues, raising his torch. Light shall triumph, he declares. Then, in what can only be described as catastrophic stage direction, the torch slips from his grasp and rolls beneath the platform. Flames lick the wood, the actors scatter, the crowd screams. Within moments, the trial of shadows becomes an accidental reenactment of hell. People stamp out the fire with cloaks and buckets, cursing and praying at once. When the smoke clears, the magistrate stands pale-faced, coughing. He wipes his eyes and speaks the words, history repeats like a refrain. This performance is hereby forbidden. And so ends the last public trial of shadows. Historians still debate whether it was ever truly demonic or merely symbolic, though most agree it was an early form of psychological theatre, a primitive exploration of conscience. The church, however, was not in the mood for nuance. From then on, shadow plays were banned in multiple dioceses, replaced with safer entertainments like morality sermons, which had roughly the same level of joy as cold porridge. The square empties, leaving behind a faint smell of smoke and a single charred torch. You pick it up warm still, faintly glowing at the tip. Another relic from another story that went too far. As you walk away, the night seems darker, as if the shadows are sulking. You can almost sense them following, silent, curious, maybe just a little smug. Up ahead, the moon breaks through the clouds, illuminating the next stretch of road. You hear the faint chiming of metal and the rhythmic splash of oars. A river. You follow it until you reach a small harbour where boats sway under the starlight. Fishermen are gathering in silence, faces solemn. They're preparing nets, but not for fish. Because the next custom you're about to witness is one of the strangest of all, the night of drowned words, when villagers threw their own wishes into the river to cleanse the year's sins. Until one year, the river threw something back. The road ends at the riverbank, where moonlight slides over the water like polished glass. The current is slow, dark, and whispering, the kind of whisper that sounds like it's repeating your thoughts back to you. Lanterns float along the shore, swaying gently in the chill air. Dozens of villagers stand in silence, each holding a scrap of parchment or cloth. Their faces glow pale in the lamplight. Nobody speaks. Not yet. You can feel it, a quiet reverence wrapped around something uneasy. This is the Night of Drowned Words, a ritual that began centuries ago as a humble act of reflection. Every year, just before winter, people gathered by the river to write down their burdens, confessions, regrets, broken promises, and cast them into the water, letting the current wash the soul clean. In theory, it was lovely. In practice, it was a logistical nightmare for the fish. You watch as a woman kneels by the water. She murmurs something, ties her note to a small stone, and tosses it in. A ripple spreads. The sound is barely audible, a soft plunk swallowed by the river's sigh. One by one, others follow. Children tossing paper hearts, elders dropping folded prayers. The air smells faintly of wax, parchment, and old wishes. A man beside you, the local miller, by his flower-streaked sleeves, leans over and whispers, "They say the river remembers." You ask what he means. He nods toward the current. If the water carries your sins away, you must never go looking for them again. But some people can't help themselves. His words hang in the air, like mist. The story goes that years ago, one man, a scholar from the nearby monastery, tried to test the ritual. He was skeptical, you see, believed it's superstition. So, after tossing his parchment in, he followed it downstream to prove nothing sacred was happening. He found it again the next morning, his note caught in the reeds. But the words, they say, had changed. Instead of his confession, there was a single line written in unfamiliar ink. "You should have left it to drown." He left the village that day and never returned. Historians, ever fond of explanations, dismiss this as folktale or humidity smearing the ink. But the villagers took it seriously, too seriously. Soon, people began adding protections. Burning incense, lighting candles, whispering, "Go and do not return," as their notes sank. A small fear crept in. What if the river truly remembered? And fear, as you've learned by now, is the fastest way to get something banned. You step closer to the water. The surface reflects the lantern's hundreds of trembling gold lights, each one a story dissolving. Then, at the far end of the crowd, a voice breaks the silence. It's a young boy. He's crying. "I dropped it wrong," he sobs. His mother rushes over, but he keeps pointing to the water. "It came back." Everyone turns. The current has pushed something toward shore. A single scrap of parchment spinning in lazy circles. It catches on a reed. A fisherman retrieves it and holds it up to the torchlight. The ink is blurred. Unreadable. Except for one word. Perfectly clear. "Stay." The crowd ripples with panic. Some back away from the river. Others whisper prayers. The priest steps forward, face pale. "Enough," he says. "No more offerings tonight." He orders the candles doused, the lanterns extinguished. The river laps quietly at the shore, as if amused by its own mischief. By morning, the decree is posted on the chapel door. Let no one write words for the water. Confession belongs to heaven, not the current. And so the Night of Drowned Words is banned. The villagers adapt, of course. They burn their confessions instead, or bury them beneath apple trees. But on still winter nights, when the moon is full, you can still find folded scraps drifting in the reeds, a faint handwriting fading into the damp. You pick one up, it's soft as tissue, almost unreadable, but one line remains. "Forgive me for remembering." You let it slip from your fingers. It floats for a moment, then sinks quietly out of sight. The river hums, indifferent. Somewhere upstream, an owl calls a long, low note that sounds suspiciously like a sigh. As you follow the path along the bank, the world grows foggy, muffled, like walking inside a dream. You begin to hear another sound, the clatter of wood, the low creak of wheels, and voices singing through mist. The tune is cheerful, the kind sung by workers with sore backs and empty stomachs. You catch fragments of words, something about good fortune, good fire, and rolling the blessing downhill. And that's how you stumble upon the next band tradition, the blessing of the wheels, a procession so beloved that it once lit up entire hillsides, until one proud village tried to outshine all the rest and accidentally set half a mountain on fire. The fog parts like a curtain, revealing a slope of rolling green that rises toward a hill crowned with torches. The night smells of sap, smoke, and ale. You follow the music and find yourself among carts and wagons lined in a row, their wooden wheels painted gold and black. Each bears a bundle of straw tied tight, gleaming faintly with oil. You looks festive until you notice the slope. It's very steep. An old man, beard the color of parchment, is painting a cross on one wheel with a brush made of twigs. He hums softly, then glances up at you. "You've come for the blessing?" he asks. You nod, because it seems polite, and he grins, showing exactly 2 teeth, then stand well back when they roll. This is the blessing of the wheels, an old midsummer rite meant to guide the sun down the sky and ensure good harvests. In towns across Europe, villagers would light wagon wheels on fire and send them rolling down hills into rivers or fields, watching sparks scatter like divine rain. The church eventually adopted it, sort of renaming it the Feast of St. John's Flame. For generations it was tolerated, even celebrated. But, as always, humanity turned reverence into sport. You look up the hill. Dozens of men are pushing their wheels into position. The flames flicker eagerly, orange and blue. Children hold their breath. Someone begins to pray. Someone else bets on which wheel will reach the bottom first. It's hard to tell which is the holier impulse. A voice booms out from the top of the hill. "Let the fire of heaven roll." And it does. The first wheel tumbles downward, wobbling, spinning faster, trailing sparks. The crowd cheers as it hits the valley floor and hisses out in the river. Beautiful. Harmless. Then the second follows. Then the third. Then, of course, comes that wheel. It's larger, heavier, built by a blacksmith who wanted the most glorious fire in Christendom. He coated it with resin, stuffed it with straw, and, for reasons lost to history, added a flag. When it rolls, it doesn't go straight. It veers sideways, bouncing high, leaving a comet's trail of sparks behind it. Children scatter, the crowd screams. The fiery wheel barrels through a fence, hits a cart, and continues toward a barn stacked with hay. You've probably guessed the rest. By morning, the blessing of the wheels has transformed into the condemnation of reckless idiocy. Half the lower field is blackened, the barn is gone. Miraculously, no one dies, but that doesn't make the sermon any shorter. The local abbot, clutching his charred hat, delivers judgment. "This tradition hath brought neither blessing nor harvest, but only chaos. No wheel shall burn henceforth," the villagers murmur. Someone protests. "It was just one wheel." Another mutters. "Aye, but it was a magnificent one." Yet the decree stands. No fire wheels, no night races, no rolling sun. The following year, the church replaces the festival with a procession of candles, safe, small, and, if we're honest, quite dull. Historians still debate whether the ban was about safety, sin, or simply clerical embarrassment. Some suggest it was a quiet attempt to erase lingering pagan symbolism. Others say it was a matter of insurance. You stand beside the river, watching the last embers drift downstream. The air smells sweet and acrid, like roasted wood and memory. The old man from before sighs beside you. "We only wanted the light to visit the fields," he says, "but it came all at once." He picks up one unburned wheel, smaller than the rest, and tosses it gently into the current. It floats, spinning lazily, its reflection glowing like a moon trapped in water. You think about how many times history has done this. Rolled joy downhill, until it caught fire. The night grows still again. The mist thickens, swallowing the last hints of orange. Only the soft rush of the river remains. Then, faintly, from farther downstream, you hear something curious. Laughter, pipes, and the rhythmic tap of wooden spoons. The smell of roasted grain drifts your way. Another village, another tradition. But this one sounds lighter, like celebration, not penance. The kind of festival that promises simple fun, which, of course, means it probably ended in disaster. Because next, you'll arrive at the Festival of the Loaf Kings, a cheerful baking contest that united communities for centuries, until one baker's enormous ego, and even larger bread, brought the entire event, and half a town square, crumbling down. You follow the smell first, that slow, honeyed perfume of baking bread that could make even a saint commit carbohydrate sin. The mist thins, and a town square unfolds before you like a painting. timbered houses leaning close, banners fluttering from windows, tables stacked with golden loaves glistening in the dawn light. A crowd gathers. Aprons are tied, ovens roar, and laughter spills like flour. This is the festival of the Loaf Kings, a beloved medieval tradition that began, innocently enough, as gratitude for the year's harvest. Bakers from each guild would present their finest bread round, platted, or filled with fruit, and the townsfolk would choose a Loaf King for the year, a baker whose bread was deemed closest to divine perfection. The prize? A wooden crown and bragging rights until next season. It should have been harmless. But of course, history has never been kind to competitions involving both pride and yeast. You weave through the crowd as the contestants line up. Each baker stands beside their creation like a proud parent at a school recital. There's the miller's apprentice, holding a modest rye loaf, the widow Margot, famous for her honey rolls, and, standing apart, a tall, broad man in a spotless tunic, Master Theobald, 3-time reigning Loaf King. His bread sits on the table like a challenge to God himself. It's enormous, round as a wagon wheel, glazed to a mirror shine. Children stare. A dog sits down beside it, perhaps in worship. Theobald folds his arms and says, "Perfection has a smell." You resist the urge to point out that pride does too. The judge, a portly alderman with crumbs already on his chin, clears his throat. As tradition decrees, we shall taste each loaf, and he's cut off by a gasp. Theobald's loaf is rising. Still, slowly, monstrously. Steam puffs from cracks along its crust. The crowd murmurs. The baker looks delighted, then worried. "What yeast did you use?" Someone asks. "The holy kind," he replies. The bread swells again, audibly, like a living thing exhaling. And then it bursts. Not an explosion exactly, more of a glorious implosion. A slow-motion shower of crumbs, steam, and existential regret. The loaf collapses inward, spilling molten honey and raisins across the table, down the legs, and onto the mayor's boots. A ripple of shock rolls through the crowd, followed by uncontrollable laughter. Theobald, red-faced, insists it's a sign of divine favor. The alderman, scraping dough from his shoes, disagrees. Later, the chronicles will record that the yeast was too lively. But those who were there whisper about something stranger, that Theobald, desperate to win again, had snuck into the monastery bakery and borrowed a bit of blessed leaven, supposedly used in sacramental wafers. It had worked too well. The bread had become an act of worship and rebellion. Within days, the bishop intervenes. His proclamation is swift. Let no man bake bread for glory. The body of Christ is not a competition. And so, the festival of the Loaf Kings is banned. The town tries to replace it with smaller, humbler feasts, day of modest pastries, blessing of the crusts. None quite stick. Bread without rivalry tastes flatter, somehow. You linger in the square as people sweep away crumbs, laughter fading into nostalgia. The smell of honey still clings to the air. Theobald's collapsed masterpiece sits cooling like a fallen monument to ambition. A child pokes the crust and whispers, "It still smells like heaven." Maybe it does. Historians, centuries later, will debate whether this event ever really happened, or if it was allegory, a fable about humility disguised as a baking mishap. But somewhere, in a small museum in Normandy, there really is a wooden crown with a scorch mark across it labelled "The Last Loaf King." You can almost imagine him still pacing the afterlife, arguing that the bread was perfect, until everyone started watching. The crowd disperses, the ovens cool, and you wander on, through the cobbled streets that twist out of town and into farmland. The air grows sweet again, touched by smoke and something floral, lavender, maybe, or incense. Ahead, on a small hill, stands a chapel built from pale stone. Its windows glow gold against the dusk. Around it, you see hundreds of candles, far too many for prayer alone. People move slowly, circling the chapel, carrying lighted tapers like stars in motion. You've reached another custom, one more beautiful than most, and, like all the rest, eventually doomed. Because this is the procession of eternal flame. A night when the faithful vowed to keep a single candle burning from dusk till dawn to symbolize divine hope. It was lovely, fragile, and deeply moving. Until one winter, someone decided to improve it. The chapel glows like a lantern dropped into darkness. A cold wind rushes down from the hills, but it cannot extinguish the shimmer of hundreds of candles moving through the night. Every flicker, every trembling flame is reflected in the villagers' eyes as they circle the chapel in solemn silence. This is the procession of the eternal flame, a tradition born from winter's fear. The story goes that long ago. A snowstorm lasted 40 nights, and the town nearly froze. When spring finally came, the survivors swore they'd never let the dark win again. So once each year, on the longest night, they lit a candle for every soul who'd endured, and promised to keep at least one flame alive until sunrise. It's simple, peaceful, beautiful. You watch the line of people moving slowly along the frozen path. Farmers, widows, children, clutching wax candles as if they're holding the heartbeat of the world. The air hums with a quiet reverence. Somewhere, a low hymn begins, soft, repetitive, the kind of melody that folds you in and rocks you like sleep. The priest, at the claiming front, raises his lantern high. The flame is eternal because hope must be, he says, his voice carried by the wind. And then, inevitably, someone decides hope could use improvement. A man at the back of the procession, young, eager, too clever, by half steps forward, holding something different. Not a candle, but a torch, its head wrapped in resin-soaked cloth. "Let mine burn brighter," he says, to guide them all. People murmur, impressed. The priest frowns. The flame is shared, not challenged. But the crowd loves a little spectacle. They cheer him on. The torch flares higher, gold and red. Sparks leap like stars. The boy grins, proud of his innovation. "It will never go out," he boasts. He's almost right. The wind shifts. The torch sputters, drops embers onto the hem of the next pilgrim's cloak. The wool catches. A cry rises. In moments, panic ripples through the line. Candles fall. Wax spills. Fire leaps from hand to hand faster than prayer. Someone screams, "Drop them!" And hundreds of flames hit the snow, sizzling out in a chorus of dying hope. The night that was meant to defy darkness becomes darker still. By dawn, the snow around the chapel is scarred, with black patches and half-burned wicks. Miraculously, no one is lost, but the village elder kneels in the soot, shaking his head. "No flame is eternal," he says. "Only the lesson." The bishop arrives a week later, writes his decree in careful Latin, and posts it to the chapel door. Henceforth, no public procession with open flame shall be held, lest zeal consume prudence. And thus ends the eternal flame snuffed out by its own brightness. Historians argue over whether the ban was purely practical or theological. Some claim the clergy feared unauthorized miracles. Others suggest a more human reason. Candles were expensive, and the local abbey kept losing its stock. Yet in secret, the villagers kept the ritual alive. Every winter, one family would light a single candle at dusk and let it burn behind shuttered windows until sunrise. No songs, no sermons, just the faint glow trembling in the dark. They called it keeping watch for the lost fire. You linger outside the chapel now, the smell of wax still heavy in the air. The stones are warm where the last candles melted against them. A child passes you, carrying a stub of unlit taper, and says softly, "We'll try again next year." Of course they will. People always do. The fire changes form, but it never truly dies. As you walk away, the wind catches the scent of something new smoke again, but lighter this time, sweeter, like roasting fruit and herbs. You hear laughter carried down the slope. Another village, another custom. You follow the sound and find yourself on a narrow lane lined with lanterns carved from turnips, not pumpkins. The air glows with mischief. Masked figures dance between doorways, carrying baskets, singing verses that are half prayer, half threat. It seems harmless children in disguise, collecting treats from neighbors. But of course, it wasn't always that way, because this is the Night of Hollow Faces, the medieval ancestor of Halloween, once a celebration of light outwitting death, until one fool decided to make the dead answer back. The lane bends like a snake through the fog, lined with flickering lanterns made from hollowed turnips. Their carved faces grin in uneven, jagged smiles, some cheerful, some grotesque. all glowing with that mischievous warmth only found on nights when superstition and celebration share the same breath. Children in rough cloaks run from door to door, carrying baskets. They sing in shrill, delighted voices, "A gift for the hollow," or "Mischief shall follow." It's playful now, but the tone carries an edge, that faint medieval flavor of charm mixed with dread. This is the night of hollow faces, the forerunner of what later centuries would call Halloween, All Hallows' Eve, or Samhain in older tongues. It began not as mischief but mercy, a night when villagers lit small lanterns to guide wandering souls home. Each flame represented a prayer for the dead, a promise that no spirit would wander forgotten. The idea was to comfort the dead. Unfortunately, people being people, they eventually tried to improve it. You watch as the villagers light more lanterns, each with a different expression. They place them on doorsteps, on walls, even hang them from branches. The effect is eerie and beautiful, dozens of faces glowing in the mist, half human, half memory. At the edge of the square stands a man in a dark robe, Brother Aldrich, the local monk. He's nervous, glancing over his shoulder toward the church. "Too many faces," he mutters. "Every year there are more." A child offers him a lantern shaped like a laughing skull. "For Father Benoit," she says innocently. Aldrich pales. Father Benoit, of course, has been dead for 3 winters. It's said that on this night, if you carved a lantern for someone who'd wronged you, their spirit would appear and ask forgiveness. But if they refused, or worse, if you lied, the hollow face would twist by morning, forever stuck in your likeness. A myth, of course, yet myths thrive best in places that need them. As the night deepens, the merriment grows louder. Someone starts a drumbeat, someone else adds a flute. Children chant rhymes, adults drink cider, and laughter rings out like a charm against fear. For one night, the living and the dead are allowed to mingle. Then, as with so many of these stories, one fool decides to test the boundary. A young man named Mathieu, bold, foolish, and fueled by cider, announces to the crowd that he'll do what no one dares: invite the dead to speak. He claims he's carved a lantern for the soul of a thief buried on the edge of town, a man executed years ago for stealing the church's silver. If the legend's true, Matthew laughs, he owes me a drink. The crowd hoots. Even Brother Aldrich can't stop him. Matthew strides to the old graveyard at the edge of the village, his lantern bobbing like a captured moon. You follow, because curiosity is a kind of gravity. The air grows colder. The laughter fades. In the half-light of the graveyard, the carved faces seem to tremble. Matthew plants his lantern on the mound of earth and calls out, "Come on, old thief. Don't keep your friends waiting." Nothing answers, only the wind through dry grass. He laughs, a little forced now. See? Stories. That's all. But as he turns to leave, the candle inside his lantern flares bright white, too bright, and the face carved into it shifts. Not much, just enough to look surprised. The crowd gasps. Matthew freezes. The light flickers once, twice, then goes out. When the smoke clears, the lantern is cold, but its carved grin has changed. The corners of its mouth curl downward, now a perfect reflection of Matthew's own expression. By morning, he's fine. Shaken, quiet, never quite the same. The villagers whisper that he moved his bed away from the window and never walked past the graveyard again. The church wastes no time. Within a week, a decree appears, nailed to the chapel door. Let no man mock the souls of the departed with false lights or false tongues. Henceforth, no carved lanterns shall be lit on All Hallows' Eve. And so, the hollow faces were outlawed. But people loved their ghosts, especially the friendly kind. They kept carving them in secret, calling them harvest lights, claiming they were only to scare away thieves, not welcome the dead. Historians would later call this superstition. Poets would call it memory with a flame inside. You stand among the fading lanterns as dawn creeps through the fog. Most of the candles have gone out, but one remains faint, flickering in a turnip carved into a gentle smile. Its light barely holds, trembling like something that doesn't want to leave. Brother Aldrich stands beside you, whispering the closing prayer. May every soul find its light again. You nod, because in this quiet grey hour, when smoke and sunrise look the same, it's easy to believe that even the band, the foolish, the forgotten, all somehow still glow a little. You walk on as the sun lifts through the mist, and from somewhere ahead, you hear the rhythmic clatter of hooves, the creak of leather, and laughter echoing down a narrow road. Another festival waits. This one sounds more civilized, a parade of knights in polished armor, banners snapping in the wind, trumpets singing glory. But medieval glory, as you'll soon learn, was fragile, because next you'll find the Tournament of Saints, a jousting ceremony so pious it nearly became a holy war, until one overzealous knight forgot where play ended and apocalypse began. The sound of hooves grows louder as you step out of the fog. The road widens into a field, ringed with banners red, gold, and white, each fluttering with the image of a saint or a cross. The grass is churned to mud by horses, and the air smells of sweat, metal, and overconfidence. You've arrived at the Tournament of Saints, a curious hybrid of chivalry and theology, the kind of medieval event that tried to make warfare holy and holiness entertaining. A herald stands on a wooden platform, shouting over the noise. Knights of the realm, sworn to virtue and valor, shall today joust in honor of the blessed protectors of our souls. Below him, 2 knights ride past in gleaming armor, one painted with the image of St. George, dragon included, the other with St. Michael, flaming sword raised. Their lances gleam, their horses snort clouds into the cold air. At first glance, it looks like any ordinary tournament, all pomp, pageantry, and questionable safety standards. But here, the stakes aren't gold or glory, they're divine bragging rights. The rules are simple, if slightly blasphemous. Each knight represents a saint. Whoever wins is said to prove that their saint holds greater favor in heaven that year. The church officially disapproves, of course, but unofficially, bishops attend with great enthusiasm and take careful notes. You make your way toward the stands, where the crowd hums with excitement. A baker sells pies shaped like halos. Children wave wooden swords. At the far end of the field, a choir of monks is singing Deus lo volt with alarming tempo, as though God truly might. The first match begins. 2 riders charge, lances lowered. The impact is thunderous. Wood splinters, metal rings, horses rear. One knight tumbles into the mud, his helmet rolling away like divine irony. The crowd erupts in cheers. The victor raises his lance and shouts, "St. Michael triumphs again." From somewhere in the stands, a man calls back, "St. George will have his vengeance." It's all good fun. Until someone, a young noble named Sir Henri of Artois, decides to raise the stakes. He rides forward, his armor black and silver, his banner depicting St. Peter holding not keys, but a sword. "This tournament," he announces, "is no game. Let heaven choose its champion." The crowd hushes. Even the horses seem to hesitate. Henri lifts his lance toward the sky. "Let the unworthy fall as Lucifer fell." It's a bit dramatic, but he means it. He's known for that kind of thing, the medieval equivalent of someone who takes cosplay way too seriously. His opponent, representing St. Paul, looks visibly uncomfortable. "Perhaps," he says, "we could just aim for the shield this time." But Henri has already spurred his horse forward. The charge is terrifying, full gallop, eyes wild, lance trembling like lightning. The 2 riders collide. A cloud of dust erupts. Then a sound no tournament ever wants to hear: a scream. When it clears, Henri lies motionless on the ground. His armor glints red where it shouldn't. The crowd falls silent. The priest hurries forward, whispering prayers. The herald, pale, mutters the medieval version of, "Oh dear God, not again." Henri's final words, according to rumor, were, "Tell St. Peter, I won." By sunset, the bishop has already written the ban. Let it be known that mock combat in the names of holy figures invites pride and bloodshed, not piety. Henceforth, no tournaments shall be held in honor of the saints. Historians, of course, love this stuff. Some argue that the ban had less to do with holiness and more with politics, too many nobles using saintly contests to settle old feuds. Others claim it was just good public relations. Nothing undermines divine grace like a fatal joust sponsored by heaven. The field empties. The choir stops singing. The banners sag in the dying wind. A monk quietly collects splinters of broken lances and tosses them into a fire. The flames flare, briefly bright, then settle into embers, as if even the saints are sighing. You linger by the fence, watching the smoke curl upward. Somewhere behind you, a blacksmith mutters, "They always forget the saints were martyrs, not showmen." You smile at that. The medieval world did love its contradictions, devotion that turned into sport, faith that flirted with spectacle. As you walk away, the sunset bleeds into the clouds, turning them the color of spilled wine. The faint clatter of armor fades behind you, replaced by a softer sound, distant singing. Not holy this time, but human. Voices rise from a village ahead. The melody is tender, slow, almost lullaby-like. People are gathered by a fountain, holding cups and candles, singing to the night itself. It's peaceful, too peaceful, because this next tradition, known as the Vigil of the Singing Cups, began as a prayer for the lost and ended when one song, too beautiful to end, simply refused to stop. You follow the voices into a small square, surrounded by stone cottages. The air smells of honey and wine, and the fountain in the center gurgles softly. Its basin filled not with coins or flowers, but with hundreds of little clay cups floating on the water. Each holds a candle, and each flickers with its own trembling flame. The villagers stand around the fountain, singing in low harmony. No instruments, just human voices, weaving through the cool night air. It's so gentle, so effortless. You almost don't notice that the song never quite ends. It just loops, verse to verse, like a river circling itself. This is the Vigil of the Singing Cups, one of those fragile customs born in grief and kept alive by habit. It began after a flood, so the elders say, when half the town was swept away in a single night. The survivors gathered by the river to mourn, lighting candles in drinking cups and letting them drift downstream with whispered names of the lost. It was meant to be one night, only. But something in that quiet rhythm of floating light and song soothed them. Every year after, they returned lighting cups for the dead, singing the same melody until dawn. And somehow, over centuries, what started as mourning became comfort. A ritual against forgetting. You listen as an old woman leads the next verse. "Drink, O night, the light we give, and carry it to where they live." Her voice wavers, but the crowd hums around her, steady as heartbeat. It's achingly beautiful, but also endless. You realize you've lost all sense of time. The song folds into itself like sleep. A young man near you whispers, "We've sung it since sundown." You glance up, the moon is already high, the horizon paling. "How long will you keep going?" you ask. He shrugs, eyes distant. "Until it lets us stop." You think he's joking until you notice the faces. Eyes half closed, lips moving automatically, breath sinking to the rhythm. The melody has them. It's less a song now than a trance. And this is where the story darkens. According to an old chronicle from the 15th century, one particular year the villagers sang through the night and kept singing after dawn, and after noon, and into the second night. No one could explain it. Some claimed the tune was holy, others said cursed. People simply couldn't stop. Their voices broke, their bodies swayed, but the melody went on, weaving through exhaustion like a fever. When priests from a neighboring town finally intervened, they had to ring church bells for hours to drown out the sound. The last singers collapsed by the fountain, cups still burning. It was called the Day of Endless Song. The church, understandably alarmed by the sight of an entire town hypnotized by its own sorrow, issued an immediate ban. Let there be no singing of laments in the night, nor floating of candles upon water, lest prayer become possession. The Vigil of the Singing Cups was outlawed, but of course, bans never stop memory. The people continued quietly, replacing their public hymns with whispered verses at home. For centuries afterward, travelers reported hearing faint music near rivers at night, thin and mournful, like breath caught in the wind. You look down at the fountain now. The villagers are still singing, though softer, slower, as if the song is winding itself to rest. A few of the cups bump against the edge, their flames guttering. An old man kneels to scoop one out and blows gently on the candle. "It must sleep," he says. "All songs must." The final verse fades. The square grows still. Only the fountain continues, murmuring to itself like a tired storyteller. The people drift away one by one, their silence more reverent than any prayer. You remain for a moment, watching the last candle float in slow circles. The flame dances once, then bows, leaving a thin thread of smoke curling into the starlight. You can't help but feel that the world itself exhales when it goes out. Then, from somewhere beyond the hill, a different sound rises sharp, rhythmic, metallic. Not song this time, but work. Hammer on anvil, steel on stone. You follow it, and soon the peaceful darkness gives way to sparks and shouting. A forge glows in the distance, surrounded by apprentices and townsfolk. It seems you've walked into another tradition, one loud enough to wake the saints. This is the midnight smithing, a festival where blacksmiths once forged charms against evil on the final night of winter. The air smells of iron and ale, and every strike rings like thunder. It began as protection. It ended, predictably, in fire. The road opens into a clearing bright as day from the heat of the forge. Sparks leap skyward like orange fireflies, the kind that never cool. A ring of blacksmiths stands at the center, hammers raised, arms gleaming with sweat and soot. Each blow lands in rhythm, a living drumbeat echoing through the cold night air. It's the midnight smithing, once the sacred vigil, held at the turning of winter, a night when, according to ancient lore, the frost devils crept up from the ground and tried to steal the world's warmth. To fight them, the smiths forged charms of iron at the stroke of midnight. They'd hammer their fear into shape and quench it in wine, believing the hiss of the cooling metal drove evil away. It's hard to say if the devils ever noticed, but the villagers certainly felt safer. You step closer. The air trembles with heat, smelling of iron and smoke, and something faintly sweet, cider, maybe, mixed with molten sparks. Apprentices feed bellows until the fire howls. The master smith, a broad man with a scar down one arm, lifts a glowing horseshoe with tongs. "This," he shouts, "is for Saint Dunstan, who once pinched the devil's nose with iron." The crowd cheers, half for faith, half for the story. He hammers once, twice, thrice, a rhythm that feels ancient, almost ceremonial. You can see the fatigue in his face, the years of smoke etched into his skin. But his eyes shine with pride. A young apprentice beside him grins. "Master," he says, "shall we make one for luck?" The older man shakes his head. "Luck's what gets you burned." The apprentice laughs anyway, and, as history loves to prove, decides to make his own luck. He pulls a small bar of iron from the coals when no one's looking, shaping it into something new. Not a horseshoe, not a charm, but a ring. He's smiling to himself, probably thinking of a girl or a story. The metal gleams white hot, a perfect circle. He dips it into the wine barrel used for quenching. The hiss is deafening, louder than thunder. For a moment, everyone freezes. The air flashes blue. The barrel shudders, then explodes. A fountain of boiling wine and flame bursts skyward, scattering burning embers across the crowd. People scream. The forge tilts. Sparks catch on hay. Within seconds, the ceremony collapses into chaos, men beating. At their sleeves, women shouting for water, the air thick with smoke and disbelief. The apprentice staggers out, unharmed but wide-eyed, clutching the half-forged ring. By dawn, the fire is out. The forge is blackened, warped, ruined. The smiths stand in silence, their pride reduced to cinders. The master, voice hoarse, says only, "No one forges at midnight again." And indeed, no one does. Within a week, the town council issues a decree. No working of iron, nor keeping of fire by night. The flame belongs to the day. The tradition dies quietly. Some say it was a blessing that the frost devils stopped visiting once humans stopped trying to outshine them. Others whisper that the fire still burns underground, hammering unseen. Centuries later, historians will find fragments of the story buried in guild records. Strange references to midnight wards, melted charms, shaped like suns, and a note in one margin reading simply, "The devil pinched back." You stand before the ruined forge now. The air is still warm, faintly humming with memory. The ring that caused it all lies half buried in ash, dull, bent, forgotten. You pick it up. It's light in your hand, harmless now. But you can still feel a pulse of something in it, not magic maybe, but intent. As you walk away, the first snow of the season begins to fall, quiet and forgiving. The flakes hiss softly as they touch the embers, like the last whispers of the old smiths fading into sleep. Down the road, the dawn glows faintly gold over the horizon. Somewhere in that light, a bell tolls one of the few still permitted to ring. Its sound rolls across the valley, clear and mournful. You follow it toward the village below, where people gather in silence around a new decree, the last in this long chain of bans. It's about speech, they say. About silence. About one final tradition too sacred to mock and too human to control. Because next comes the last banquet of words, a feast where people once spoke every truth they'd hidden all year, one night only, before sealing their tongues in ritual silence. And you're just in time for its final supper. You arrive at dusk, when the light turns to honey, and the air carries that solemn hush that only precedes endings. The village square is quiet, unnervingly so. Tables stretch from one end to the other, covered in earthen bowls, loaves of bread, and candles burning low, their flames small and steady. Around them sit men, women, children, the whole town, all waiting, hands folded, lips pressed tight. This is the last banquet of words, the strangest and most fragile of all medieval rites. A night to unburden the tongue before winter sealed it in silence. The custom began long ago, when words were thought to have weight, real, physical gravity. People believed every unspoken truth hung invisibly in the air, pressing down on the world until something broke. Crops failed, cows stopped giving milk, marriages soured. So, once each year, before the cold set in, everyone gathered to speak everything they had swallowed. Every resentment, every confession, every secret wish. They called it unloading the soul. A bell rings softly. The elder rises. Tonight, she says, we feast with our mouths, but feed with our hearts. Speak your truths, and let silence eat the rest. One by one, the villagers stand. A farmer admits he blamed his neighbor for the ruined field. A mother confesses she still sets an extra plate for her dead child. A young woman whispers that she doesn't believe in saints, but pretends for her father's sake. Each voice trembles, then steadies, like a candle finding its wick. You listen, and something inside you tightens not from discomfort, but from recognition. There's something profoundly human in the sound of honest speech. It fills the square like a tide, equal parts pain and peace. Then the baker stands, wiping his hands on his apron. I stole yeast, he says, simply. The crowd murmurs, not shock, but weary understanding. From whom? The elder asks. The baker hesitates, then sighs. From the monastery. The priest stiffens, eyes narrowing. You stole from God's house? Only a handful, the baker replies. To feed the hungry. Silence. You can feel the moment teetering the old struggle between law and mercy. The crowd looks from the baker to the priest, waiting. Finally, the elder says, then God was fed too. A faint laugh escapes the priest, surprised and unwilling. The tension breaks. The night softens again. More confessions follow, small, humble, utterly ordinary. Regrets about lost loves, broken promises, forgotten prayers. The air grows lighter with each one, as if all those invisible weights truly are lifting. And then, as it always does, comes the moment of excess. A man at the end of the table, a young scholar from the nearby abbey, stands abruptly. If words have power, he says, then so does truth. And if tonight we speak all things, then let me speak the forbidden. The square stills. Even the candles seem to hold their breath. He continues. The sun does not move around us. We move around it. A gasp ripples through the crowd. The priest's face goes white. Blasphemy, he whispers. But the scholar only smiles, calm and certain. It's not blasphemy. It's observation. A voice from the crowd calls out. Then why speak it here? Because truth, the scholar says, deserves one night. It's too much, too raw, too big. The bell rings again, sharply this time a signal to end. The elder raises her hands. Enough. The feast is closed. The tongues are sealed. One by one, the villagers press fingers to their lips and lower their eyes. The scholar sits, trembling slightly but unrepentant. The candles burn low, the last light trembling in the wax. The following morning, a decree appears on the chapel door. Let no public confessions be spoken henceforth. The tongue of truth has no master but madness. And so, the banquet of words is banned, the final act, in a long play of fear and wonder. Historians will later note how strange it was that an age so full of noise bells, chants, laughter, prayer, ended by outlawing speech itself. But perhaps that's how it had to end. Every tradition you've walked through tonight, from bread to fire, dance to song, burned too brightly, sang too loudly, lived too freely. Humanity always reached for the sacred and the absurd at once, and in doing so, it kept setting fire to its own joy. You remain in the square after everyone's gone. The tables are empty, the candles melted into small golden pools. A breeze passes through, carrying the faint echo of voices, laughter, argument, prayer, all the sounds that once filled this place. You close your eyes, you can still hear them, faint but real. The whisper of the baker to his bread, the rhythm of forbidden drums, the hush of monks singing beauty into silence. And maybe that's the truest ending, not the bans, not the edicts, but the echoes. Because no tradition ever truly dies. It just hides in memory, waiting for someone to listen again. You tilt your head. Somewhere far away, a rooster crows the same ancient note that began this journey, breaking night into morning. The wind softens. The square exhales, and as the first light slips over the rooftops, you hear the final line of a story centuries long in the making. Every age forgets what it loves and remembers what it forbids. Now let the dawn take what remains. Breathe slower. The bells are quiet. The world, at last, is asleep. The village fades behind you as you walk down the empty road, your footsteps soft on the cobblestones. The horizon glows pale gold, and the fields stretch out like pages turning in the light. The air smells of ash and morning bread. Everything that was noise a moment ago is now. The gentle wind in the grass, the creak of a shutter, a single bird calling as if to test the silence. You think about all the lives that pass through these traditions, the bakers, the fools, the singers, the smiths, all trying, in their own fragile way, to make sense of time, to turn fear into rhythm, hunger into ritual, chaos into something worth remembering. You realize that even in their mistakes, there was beauty. Every ban was proof that someone once cared enough to celebrate too much. The sky lightens, the road bends, a river glints ahead, calm and endless. You sit beside it for a while. The water moves with that slow, hypnotic grace that could carry any thought away if you let it. You close your eyes. Somewhere, a faint echo of laughter lingers. Somewhere, a bell rings once, far away, not to summon, not to warn, but simply to exist. You breathe in. The air tastes of earth and warmth. The world feels very old and very new at once. And as the sun rises, soft and forgiving, you let the last words drift away, sinking quietly like the scraps of paper on the night of drowned words. History sleeps again, and so do you.